We now move to First Minister's question time. Question number 1, Joanne Lamont.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister what engagements he has planned for the rest of the day.
First Minister.
Later today, I'll take forward the Government's programme for Scotland.
Joanne Lamont.
Excellent. I would like today to discuss an RBS banker who enjoyed huge success but whose arrogance drove him to overreach himself and lead Scotland to disaster. The First Minister hasn't need to worry. I'm not talking about him. I am, of course, talking about Fred Goodwin. This is the Fred Goodwin that the First Minister wrote to backing the deal which broke the bank. And this is what the First Minister wrote. Dear Fred, I wanted you to know that I am watching events closely on the ABN front. It is in Scottish interests for RBS to be successful, and I would like to offer any assistance my office can provide. Good luck with the bid. Yours for Scotland, Alec. Yesterday, the First Minister admitted, with the benefit of hindsight, he would have done things differently. Does that mean he is prepared to apologise to the people of Scotland for a serious error of judgment?
First Minister.
As I mentioned yesterday, I regret lighting that letter. That much is obvious. But as I said to Joanne Lamont last week, I really don't think Fred Goodwin is the Labour Party's strongest suit. It was, after all, my predecessor, Jack McConnell, who recommended him for a knighthood, as we now understand. And it was Gordon Brown, as Prime Minister, who appointed him as one of his economic advisers. So, certainly, I regret writing him a letter. But I didn't have him as a financial adviser. I didn't have 6 meetings with him as Chancellor, as Gordon Brown and Alistair Darling did in the space of just over a year. And he wasn't at the heart of this government advising on economic policy. So I really suggest to Joanne Lamont that Fred Goodwin and the Fred Goodwin story is not the Labour Party's strongest suit.
Joanne Lamont.
No, in a previous life I was a school teacher, and if I asked a child to accept that they had done something wrong, I didn't accept the defence. It wasn't just me. It's not a defence to say that other people made mistakes as well. What I have asked the First Minister, and he has singularly refused to do, was to apologise for his error of judgment. His judgment was wrong. He should apologise, but more importantly, he needs to learn a lesson from it. Mr Goodwin clearly got carried away with himself, didn't ask the hard questions and became blind to the consequence. The First Minister is in danger of doing likewise. So let's have a look at the hard questions about separation. For it's not just I who questions the First Minister's judgment. Professor John Kay, his former economic adviser, says if Scotland was to remain in a currency union, and I quote, it might cause people to start wondering what the point of independence was in the first place. Can the First Minister tell Professor Kay and the rest of us exactly what is the point?
First Minister.
Right, well, can I just before Joanne Lamont wants to wander off the subject of Fred Goodwin, can I just remind Joanne Lamont that there has actually now been an inquiry by the Financial Services Authority into the collapse of the Royal Bank of Scotland. It was published on the 12th of December last year. It does name 3 politicians as being influential in the FSA's extraordinary decision to have lax financial supervision. The first of these is Tony Blair, the second is Gordon Brown, and the third is Ed Balls. One gone, one going, one still there. As far as the benefits of having fiscal independence are concerned, I suspect it's something to do with the fact that right now this Parliament controls about 12.5% of the finances and resources of Scotland. Under the Salmond proposals, that will creep up towards 20%. Under independence, we'll control 100%. That sounds to me like independence.
Joanne Lamont.
The First Minister needs to learn from history, not rewrite it. But the fact of the matter is, it was the First Minister who said that the problem with banking regulation was that it was gold-plated and that he would lighten that regulation. And on the question of the currency union, it is curious that the First Minister is sticking by his plan to remain in a currency union. Last week, to bolster his position, he told us there are 67 countries who have a similar arrangement. Yet, in response to my office, to Spice and to the media, he refused all week to name them until 30 minutes ago. 7 days to get information he could have got in 7 seconds from Wikipedia. So, can he clear this up? Can he give it? Can he clear?
Order. Order. Can we please settle down, Ms Lamont? Can we?
So can he clear this up and give us all 3 good examples of countries that don't have a central bank and are in a currency union?
First Minister.
Well, can I first, again, since Joanne Lamont tries to ask 2 questions in one, turn to the first part of her question. She complains about one comment from me in 25 years about light touch regulation. Can I remind her of the comments of the Prime Minister who was in charge as Chancellor in November 2005 on these things? He argued in a speech to the CBI on the 28th of November 2005 that he wasn't proposing just a light touch regulation but a limited touch. And he then went on, Gordon Brown, and more than that, we should not only apply the concept of risk to the enforcement of regulation, but also the design, indeed to the decision as to whether to regulate at all. He wasn't just proposing light touch regulation, he was proposing no regulation. As far as the country, I really do think the Labour Party shouldn't have to rely on the Scottish Government to provide it with ammunition. If she wants to ask me the question, ask me the question. In terms of monetary unions, isn't it better to come along and ask the question as opposed to wanting the answer in advance? As in terms of the question, of the 20 most prosperous countries in the Organisation of Economic Cooperation and Development, 11 out of the top 20, including Switzerland, are currently in monetary unions. That sounds to me like monetary unions is a pretty common feature across the planet and across prosperous countries. Joanne Lamont seems to complain that we've made the suggestion that there should be a monetary union between Scotland and England after independence. We're merely pointing out last week and this week that such arrangements are not uncommon in the modern world, but these countries are still independent countries. And it does strike me, if it's good enough for all these other countries around the world, including 11 out of the top 20 most prosperous countries in the OECD, it might not be too bad a thing for Scotland. And I also helpfully explained last week as to why, given the protection it would offer, the huge protection it would offer to the balance of payments, it might be rather a good thing for England as well. I'm just trying to be helpful and cooperative.
Ms Lamont, before you start, there's far too much shouting at each other across the chamber. It's Ms Lamont that's asked the questions, it's First Minister that's asking them. Can the rest of you just settle down? Ms Lamont.
If it were so, the fact of the matter is, whatever that was, it wasn't an answer, and it certainly didn't clarify anything, because the reality is, up to a third of those countries that are identified amongst the 67 have absolutely no influence whatsoever. And it appears what the First Minister is saying is that independence at any cost is what he's pursuing. Because the fact of the matter is, the First Minister's case for independence is beginning to look like the RBS deal that broke the bank. He can't provide the detail. And when you look at it closely, it falls apart. A currency union, just like, say, Togo, San Marino, or the Federated States of Micronesia. In 2003, we were getting the euro. In 2005, a Scottish central bank. Yesterday it was sterling, but somehow free from the Bank of England. Is it not the case, demonstrably, that the First Minister is simply unable to make an economic case for independence? And isn't the First Minister in danger of becoming the Fred Goodwin of Scottish politics?
First Minister. Order. First Minister.
Joanne Lamont hasn't seemed to appreciate the point I made about 11 of the most prosperous countries in the world being in a monetary union. It's not an unusual state of affairs, nor has she taken on board the point I made last week that Gordon Brown gave away the right to set interest rates in 2007 when he declared the 1997 when he declared the Bank of England independent. I really think the Labour Party have to catch up with the policies that they pursued in government. Now, Joanne Lamont names a number of countries which she thinks is quite amusing that are in monetary union. So let's look at some of the countries in the world which are not in monetary unions. The Democratic Republic of Congo is not in a monetary union. Iran is not in a monetary union, and North Korea is not in a monetary union. So what exactly is the point? I think it's a reasonable proposition to argue that a monetary union is not uncommon in the modern world. 11 out of the top 20 in the OECD. Incidentally, of the other 9, I believe that all but Japan have been in a monetary arrangement at some point in fairly recent history. So these things are not uncommon in the modern world. What is the purpose and point of independence is to control your taxation policy, to control your resources, control the wealth of the country. And it is the fact that if we look at the last 5 years of Scotland's balance of income and revenue, then we would have been £7.5 billion better off if we controlled our own revenue and our own resources. That seems to me a rather powerful economic argument for independence.
Question number 2, Ruth Davidson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister when he'll next meet the Prime Minister.
Minister.
Well, I'm seeking early meetings with the Prime Minister, as I have been for the last 6 months or so. So I'm hopeful that there will be an early meeting with the Prime Minister so as we can take forward a few matters on a mutual agenda at the present moment.
Ruth Davidson.
Presumably the mutual agenda he's talking about is the referendum, and since the consultation was launched in this chamber, members on the government benches, from the First Minister right through his cabinet down to the lowliest of lowly backbenchers, has been using the removal of nuclear-armed and powered submarines from Faslane as a reason for Scotland to become a separate state from the rest of the UK. The Faslane Naval Base is the largest single-site employer in Scotland, with 6,500 people working on the Clyde. The latest MOD figures show that there are 18,000 uniformed and civilian defence personnel based across 30 of Scotland's 32 local authority areas. That does not include the 4,500 workers in yards in Rosyth and on the Clyde, building Navy destroyers and aircraft carriers, or the thousands of other defence contractors right across Scotland engaged in work for the UK military. So we know that the First Minister wants to decimate the 6,500-strong workforce on Faslane, but how many defence workers, uniformed or otherwise, does he actually plan to keep?
First Minister.
Can I point out a replacement for the Trident submarine fleet? The estimated cost over the next generation would be £100,000 million. I don't even believe that Ruth Davidson would argue that there could be more sensible investment and that would create far more jobs than investing in a new generation of Trident submarines. The guarantee that we've given, as opposed to what's happened under the UK, is that we'd maintain the military establishment in terms of bases after independence. That includes a naval base at Faslane, which incidentally is not just the home for the Trident fleet, it's the home for minesweepers and other submarines as well. But I'm interested in this proposition that there could be no orders for Scottish Yards post-independence. Can I quote Ruth Davidson from Jane's Defence Industry recently, the 4th of October 2011, the Bible of military procurement. The UK Ministry of Defence is entering the final round of bidding for its Mars military afloat reach and sustainability tanker requirements, with just 3 of the original 6 contenders left in the frame. Daewoo Shipbuilding and Marine Engineering, South Korea, Fincantieri from Italy and Hyundai Heavy Industries from South Korea remain in contention. Is Ruth Davidson's proposition really that the Ministry of Defence will purchase from Italy and South Korea but wouldn't purchase from the Clyde Yards or from Rosyth? Can I point out to her that under current EU regulation, then it's perfectly permissible and possible, and the Clyde Yards are there because of the excellence of their workforce and the efficiency of the product they produce. And it really would be quite interesting if the Conservative Party, given its lowly position in Scottish politics, realised that talking down Scotland in this manner is not the way to obtain votes in the Scottish people.
Ms Davidson.
So no answer then on the number of jobs, just as there's no answer on what this one naval base in independent Scotland would have in terms of minesweepers or destroyers or frigates, what we do with the Marines, what we do about a fleet auxiliary. So let's look at the response from experts to the First Minister's plans on defence, shall we? Former Commander of the Black Watch, Lieutenant Colonel Sir Andrew Ogilvie-Wedderburn, who said that the First Minister had, and I quote, absolutely no grasp on how the armed forces work. Lord Robertson, the former Secretary-General of NATO, saying that the First Minister's plans... Saying the First Minister's plans have no coherence or relevance. What about logistical troops? What about combat support, combat service support, engineers, medics, communicators, reconnaissance, surveillance, intelligence forces? Nothing said about how this gap is to be filled. And Colonel Clive Fairweather, former commanding officer of the King's Own Scottish Borderers, former deputy commander of the SAS. I have respect for some of the stuff the SNP come up with and are proposing, but when it comes to defence, I don't think they have a Scooby. I do find Mr Salmond very, very, very weak in this area. I have watched him. I have been with him. He really doesn't understand it. He doesn't get it. There are so many unanswered questions on Scottish Government's plans for defence, but I'm going to ask just one, and it comes from a young Scottish soldier who's based down south who wrote to me this week. And he wrote saying, "Dear Miss Davidson, I would have thought the member would have had more respect. Dear Miss Davidson."
Order. The member speaking.
"Dear Miss Davidson, I am currently serving the British Army and have done so for the past 2 years. I am due to deploy in operations in Afghanistan in early April. I love my job and I am proud to serve this country. I am sure that you are aware of the phrase back of a fag packet, and this, it seems, is how Mr Salmond has developed his plan for the armed forces. I would be greatly appreciative if you could raise the following question for me. Does the First Minister envisage a point where those serving will be forced to make a choice between the uniform in which they have faithfully served the Crown and in many cases tragically lost friends and the country of their birth?" Well, Presiding Officer, does he?
First Minister.
Well, the people would certainly have a choice in terms of the armed forces in which to serve. I mean, in the last count, I think there are 23 nationalities serving in the British Armed Forces at the present moment. The issue of choice, of course, is a very valuable one. You see, the soldiers who have been made compulsory redundant at the present moment from the armed forces, they don't have a choice. They are being made compulsory redundant by the government which Ruth Davidson supports, while many of them have been in theatres of conflict. That's no choice at all. Not incidentally, I met Clive Fairweather when I was marching to defend the Scottish regiments which were being shut down by the Labour Party government. Nor do I think George Robertson, perhaps, is the strongest suit for the Conservative. After all, not only did George Robertson say that devolution would kill the SNP stone dead, I don't think that's quite happened. But also, of course, he described the strategic... I think Ruth Davidson should have a glance at today's Mori opinion poll, showing 49% support for the Scottish National Party and 12% support for the Conservative Party. A reduction even on the previous low record levels. So I don't think George Robertson, perhaps, because after all he did describe the strategic defence review as neither strategic nor a defence review. So she should be very careful who she quotes. I rather liked, in terms of advisers, the quotes of the former financial adviser to the Conservative Party, indeed the former member of this Parliament, Brian Monteith, writing only 2 days ago, "By taking a position of no more powers because he says so, the Prime Minister has laid his party open to the charge of arrogance and left isolated those Tories who seek to defend him. With these injudicious comments in his name, the Prime Minister has consigned Ruth Davidson's nascent leadership to ignominy and failure." I never thought I'd find myself in agreement with Brian Monteith, but perhaps he's on to something at last.
David Torrance.
The
The First Minister will be aware that over the last few weeks, the Chairman and 3 members of the Board of Adam Smith College have resigned following allegations of bullying, intimidation, victimisation and financial mismanagement at the college. Will the First Minister advise what actions can be taken to hold an external investigation into the governance and the management of Adam Smith College?
First Minister.
Well, the Scottish Government takes allegations of this kind very seriously. It's important, of course, that all the facts are scrutinised before any specific course of action can be taken. To this end, the Cabinet Secretary for Education and Lifelong Learning has asked the Scottish Funding Council to take appropriate steps and report on the issue, taking account of all the evidence available and seeking assurances that the college's governance and management practices are properly and effectively serving the needs of learners.
John Pentland.
First Minister, I have been informed that one of the bids for the fourth crossing included the supply of steel by Tata from the DL plant in Motherwell. This would have been a major boost for employment in my constituency in Lanarkshire and to Scotland's steel industry. So can the First Minister explain why Transport Scotland said that no Scottish firms were involved, and will he meet with the Chief Executive of Tata to discuss the role of Scottish steel industry?
First Minister.
I'm certainly glad to arrange the ministerial meeting, but can I point out to the member that there's been 118 subcontracts already awarded to Scottish firms from a total of 155 subcontracts awarded to date. That represents 76% of the total number of subcontracts awarded. That, I would have thought, when we consider that of 1,041 supply orders have been awarded to the principal contract, of which 870 have been to Scottish companies. The reason I quote that in strong evidence is I know that the member wouldn't wish to give any sort of misleading impression of the willingness of the contracts to be awarded to Scottish companies where possible, and I think these figures illustrate that determination. So I'm very happy to arrange the ministerial meetings because I would have thought the evidence indicates a strong willingness on the part of the various members of the consortium, including Morrison Construction, to make awards of Scottish contract where it's possible to do so.
Question number 3, Nigel Dawn.
To ask the First Minister what impact the increase in applications to Scottish universities from Scottish-based students will have on the higher education sector.
First Minister.
Well, I'm delighted that individual institutions in Scotland are reporting an increase in the number of applications received from Scottish students. The Government has protected funding to our universities, ensuring that Scotland continues to deliver world-class higher education, and that's recognised, of course, which should be a matter of general celebration in this chamber, that 5 of the universities are in the top 200 worldwide.
Nigel Dawn.
I thank the First Minister for that response. Does he agree that with English students applying to English universities down by 9.8% and the number of Scots applying to study in England down by 16.4%, these figures are actually demonstrating perfectly the destructive nature of the fee regime south of the border?
First Minister.
Well, I noticed the comments from the National Union of Students saying that these figures fully vindicated the Scottish Government's approach in terms of the abolition of tuition fees for Scottish students. It also indicated that the fears, indeed the claims expressed by the Labour Party have proved totally ill-founded. It was explained when the initial figures came out that they should wait till the complete figures were available. I think they should have taken that advice from the Education Secretary, because looking at the difficult position facing our university and facing students, I think the generality of opinion, the overwhelming opinion would be that our universities are better funded than any other similar institutions across these islands. I remember back in 1979 that some people in the university sector were campaigning not to be under the province of this Parliament. I doubt if you get a single person in the university sector now who wouldn't want to be other than have the sympathetic treatment of this Parliament, as opposed to the fate that's been delivered to universities in England. It also indicates that the decline in English students applying for Scottish universities is half of the decline of English students applying for English universities, which seems to me that the Education Secretary and our universities have got the balance right in maintaining the standard of education in Scotland, maintaining the excellence, maintaining that broad cross-section, but above all, the entitlement of free education to the people of Scotland.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The £75 million per year which the Scottish Government is spending to provide free tuition to foreign students could be spent on Scotland's colleges. Will the First Minister give me a guarantee that this will stop?
First Minister.
Well, as the member knows, the Education Secretary is working to ensure that a charge of some kind can be applied to other students from the European Union. But I think the member should reflect on the fact that one of the biggest rises in terms of number of students, indeed the biggest rise across the sector, has been from international students. That's students out with the European Union. And I would have thought that he would agree with me that is an indication of the excellence and quality of Scottish university education. And in terms of the college sector, can I just point to the member the extraordinary increase in capital investment affecting places like Forth Valley College, the Dundee College, the Inverness College to come, the Glasgow colleges, and the amazing capital investments being spent there, the Kilmarnock College, which is many, many times the investment in any year under the Labour-Liberal coalition. So I think you should reflect on the fact that the regional structure for colleges and the capital investments going in offers substantially good news for the college sector in Scotland, just as there seems to be no complaint now there is substantially good news for the university sector in Scotland.
Question number 4, Christina McKelvey.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister what action the Scottish Government is taking to address unemployment amongst young people.
First Minister.
Well, I appointed Angela Constance as the first Youth Employment Minister anywhere in these islands to lead our response in driving up youth employment and announced the additional £30 million investment to support the Opportunities for All commitment.
Christina McKelvey.
I thank the First Minister for that response and welcome these actions, of course. But it was the Labour Party who voted against the Scottish Government's commitment to provide 25,000 modern apprenticeships in every year of this Parliament. Can the First Minister offer an update as to the progress of these apprenticeships, as they offer a vital way of ensuring young people get the skills and experience they need to gain future employment?
First Minister.
Well, I noticed some surprise in the Labour benches when Christina McKelvey made that comment, and I know many people in the Labour benches are new, and given that Labour have fallen to a historic low of 23% in the Murray poll I mentioned earlier, there may be a further turnaround to come after the next election. But it is actually true, and you can consult your experienced colleagues, that Labour Party managed to get itself into a position of voting against a budget which proposed 25,000 modern apprenticeships, 60% more than when the Labour Party were in office. And I am delighted to tell Christina McKelvey that the Skills Development Scotland are now confident that even that mighty total of 25,000 apprentices, all of whom are attached to a job in Scotland, one of the crucial things about our modern apprenticeships, even that 25,000 is going to be achieved in this financial year, something that every member of this Parliament should be supporting and celebrating.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I was very pleased to attend the National Economic Forum yesterday because all parties in this chamber are committed to tackling youth unemployment and the national crisis which faces Scotland's young people. So when will the First Minister accept that his plans to cut college budgets will only make life harder for the 100,000 young Scots looking to him for help?
First Minister.
Well, I welcome the all-party involvement.
Order.
I welcome the all-party involvement at the forum yesterday, including the presence of the member. I think that's excellent when members across this chamber express their priority for youth employment. And we also had questions in terms of the importance of support for students, and acknowledgement of our aims and intention in terms of the minimum income guarantee. But can I gently point out to the member that the sum in terms of support for college students she complains about is substantially higher, despite the extraordinary cuts in public spending, is substantially higher than the one we inherited when we took office in 2007. And not just that, but the educational maintenance allowance, which is absolutely critical for many pupils from disadvantaged backgrounds staying on at school and going to college, has been maintained in Scotland, even though it's been abolished south of the border.
Question number 5, Malcolm Chisholm.
To ask the First Minister whether the Scottish Government will reconsider the decision to abolish prison visiting committees.
First Minister.
Well, I know there's been a lively debate in the last few minutes, but the Cabinet Secretary for Justice indicated the proposals in prison visiting are about modernising and developing a service that meets prisoners' needs. As he outlined to the Chamber a few minutes ago, he will carry out a further public consultation on these proposals and continue discussions with stakeholders in developing the best way forward. This move will ensure we have a service fit for this century.
answer. It would help if he withdrew the letter that he submitted a few days ago saying he would abolish them. Now, we all recognise the need for independent advocacy, and in fact many prisoners should already have rights to it under the 2003 legislation. But will the government stop using that as cover for the abolition of prison visiting committees, which fulfil a completely different role concerned with monitoring, complaints and the reporting of problems? Now, in the current Police Act, the Government has recognised the need to strengthen the independent monitoring of police custody cells. So will the First Minister demonstrate a degree of consistency and coherence by allowing the prison visiting committees to continue their vitally important work?
First Minister.
But I don't think Malcolm Chisholm is being and I'm sure it's inadvertent, altogether fair to the Cabinet Secretary for Justice. It seems to me that the amendment that's on the order paper and the attitude that he struck up in terms of having a further public consultation on these proposals does indicate a willingness to listen and take into account the views. And I don't think Malcolm Chisholm should take the view that the structure we've had over a century now is inevitably the right structure. I mean, he will remember that thanks to the legacy of the Labour-Liberal coalition, we ran into very substantial problems on issues like swapping out, which cost the public purse substantial amounts of money, and if we hadn't taken remedial action, it could have cost us substantially more. So I think when we're looking at a prison service for this century with the checks and balances, I think the indication from the Cabinet Secretary of the willingness to listen, the indication of going out to further consultation, should actually, with his usual generosity, be welcomed by Malcolm Chisholm.
Question number 6, Murdo Fraser.
Thank you. To ask the First Minister what support the Scottish Government has given to Edinburgh's bid to host the Green Investment Bank.
First Minister.
Well, on the 24th of May, as part of a wide-ranging discussion with the Chancellor of the Exchequer, I put Edinburgh forward as a possible location for the Green Investment Bank. I am delighted to say that a broad partnership of private and public sector bodies have backed us. City of Edinburgh Council, Scottish Financial Enterprise, Edinburgh Chamber of Commerce, Scottish Power, PricewaterhouseCoopers and Grant Thornton, to name just a few. I am sure that Murdo Fraser want to welcome the efforts of this cross-party partnership, and with that usual touch for unity of purpose, which he always displays, would not want to do anything to disrupt that unity at this vital time.
Murdo Fraser.
Can I thank the First Minister for his response and warmly welcome the cross-party support to bring this important UK institution with its many jobs to Edinburgh. But should Edinburgh's bid be successful, would the First Minister be surprised if, pending the outcome of the referendum, this UK Green Investment Bank only signed a short-term lease?
First Minister.
Well, I can say a number of things to Murdo Fraser. We just established the headquarters of the British Irish Council in this capital city of Edinburgh, recognising, I think, that there will be shared interests across these islands after Scottish independence, which will be deployed. I'm sure green investment will be a shared interest across these islands, because I had a meeting with the Chief Executive of GEM only yesterday, who indicated to me his fears that without substantial quantities of marine electricity in the west and possibly the east coast coming down into the English market, then there will be a very severe issue in terms of security of supply of electricity into the English grid. That would seem to me to be a shared interest. It's something, incidentally, which the Energy Minister has also been discussing with Charles Henry, with the Republic of Ireland. But I notice in terms of investment in Scotland that same Energy Minister is showing a tremendous confidence in investment in Scotland, and leading by example. Only in the last few weeks, he's bought Blair Castle in Ayrshire for £2.5 million as a second home. Now, I just think, when the Energy Minister regales about possible lack of confidence in Scotland against all of the available evidence, including the magnificent Samsung investment only this week, that he personally is putting his investment into Scotland. I'm doing what any member of the Tory cabinet in London would do, investing a small part of their personal fortune in a Scottish castle.
That ends First Minister's questions. Business starts again at 2:15.